My parents told me they'd change the locks that night unless I checked into rehab.
My name's Harper Ellis. I'm 28 now, and I spent about 4 years in escort work before I got out. Before any of that, my days were pretty regular. I'd wake up in my childhood bedroom in the suburbs of Melbourne, the same one with the faded band posters still on the walls and the guitar leaning against the desk. Mum would already be downstairs making coffee, and Dad would be checking emails at the table before he headed off to the engineering firm. I'd grab a piece of toast, kiss her on the cheek, and catch the train into the city for uni. First-year stuff, lectures that started too early, group projects that annoyed me, and that constant low-level feeling that I was just doing what everyone expected. I played guitar a lot back then. Not seriously, just in my room after dinner or sometimes with friends on the weekends. We'd sit around in someone's backyard, someone would pass a beer, and I'd pick out whatever song was stuck in my head. I had a solid group, people I'd known since high school, plus a few new ones from campus. We laughed a lot. We talked about stupid things. I was the one who always remembered birthdays and brought snacks. People liked having me around. I liked being that person. Most nights, I was home by 10 if I didn't have plans. Mum would leave the porch light on, and I'd walk in and tell her about my day while she marked papers at the kitchen table. She always listened. Even when I was half distracted scrolling on my phone, she'd wait until I finished talking before she said anything. Dad was quieter, but he'd nod along and ask if I needed anything fixed or if the car needed gas. It felt steady, safe even. I got good grades without trying too hard. Teachers used to say I had potential. Friends said I was lucky, and I believed them, mostly. But sometimes, late at night, when the house was quiet, I'd lie there and feel this small, restless itch. Like the life I was living was already mapped out and I was just following the lines. I'd think about how ordinary it all looked from the outside. Suburban house, steady parents, predictable path, and something in me would tighten. I didn't hate it, I just didn't want to stay inside it forever. By the time I turned 18, I was already pushing a little. Weekend parties got longer. Someone would bring something to take the edge off, and I'd try it because everyone else was. It wasn't a big deal at first, just enough to make the music louder and the conversations feel more important. I'd come home late, still buzzing a bit, and Mum would open the door without a word. She'd just look at me, hand me a glass of water, and go back to bed. I told myself that was normal. Everyone experiments. Everyone wants to feel something different for a while. Looking back, those were the years when I still thought I could have both, the safe life and the version of me that stood out. I didn't see the crack yet. I just felt it under the surface, quiet and constant, like a song I couldn't quite remember the words to. The parties started taking up more space than I meant them to. What used to be 1 or 2 nights a week turned into most weekends, then the occasional Tuesday or Wednesday when someone texted that they had a place free. I'd skip the early lecture, tell myself I'd catch up later, and go. The pills that used to just take the edge off started feeling necessary. Not every day, just enough days that I noticed when I didn't have them. Uni work piled up quietly. I'd open my laptop, stare at the same paragraph for 20 minutes, then close it again. Assignments came back with notes that were polite but clear. I was slipping. I told myself it was temporary. Everyone hits a rough patch in first year. But the rough patch didn't end. I'd sit in the library and feel this low, constant pressure in my chest, like I was already behind and the gap was only getting wider. Money got tighter in small ways. Train fares, coffee, the random things friends expected you to chip in for. I'd check my account and feel that little drop in my stomach when the number was lower than I thought. Mom offered to help a couple of times. I said no. I didn't want to explain why I was short. Dad noticed the late nights more than he said. He'd ask if everything was okay in that quiet way of his, and I'd give the same short answer I always did. Fine, just busy. The house started feeling different when I came home. Not hostile, just quieter. Mum still left the light on, still handed me water if I looked rough, but the easy conversations got shorter. Sometimes I'd walk past the kitchen and catch her looking at me like she was trying to figure something out. I hated that look. It made the restlessness worse. I'd go upstairs, put on headphones, and play the same 3 chords over and over until my fingers hurt. Friends still called, but the group felt looser. People were settling into their own routines, study groups, part-time jobs, relationships that actually lasted more than a month. I'd show up late to things or cancel last minute and tell myself they'd understand. A few times, I sat in my room on a Friday night with nowhere to go and felt that old fear again, the one from when my best friend moved away when I was 14. Like the space around me was getting bigger and no one was noticing. I didn't crash all at once. It was slower than that. Just a steady drip of small failures I kept promising I'd fix tomorrow. Grades, money, the way my parents' faces changed when I walked through the door. The way I started avoiding mirrors some mornings because I didn't like what I saw looking back. I still thought I could pull it together. I just didn't know how. And the longer I waited, the heavier everything felt. I kept telling myself I could still fix it the normal way. Cut back on the parties, show up to every lecture, get a regular job on the weekends, even if it was just coffee or retail. I looked at a few listings. I even filled out one application and then deleted it because the thought of standing behind a counter for $12 an hour made something in me shut down. That wasn't the version of myself I wanted. I wanted people to notice when I walked into a room. I wanted to feel like I mattered more than the average person. The group started talking about it one night like it was nothing. We were at someone's apartment, music low, a few of us still half high. Someone said the real girls weren't just showing up to parties. They could make any guy pay. Literally pay. For their time, their attention, whatever. It got laughed off at first. Then someone else said they'd heard of girls doing it and living better than the rest of us. I sat there quiet, turning the idea over in my head like a stone. It felt dirty and exciting at the same time. I told myself I wasn't that kind of person. I had parents who still believed in me. I had a future that was supposed to look different. I tried harder for a couple of weeks, studied until my eyes burned, said no to a few nights out. But the restless feeling didn't leave. If anything, it got louder. I'd catch my reflection and think, this is it? This ordinary face? This ordinary life? The fear of staying average sat heavier than the shame of what the group had talked about. I started asking quiet questions. How it worked, who to talk to, what the first step even looked like. Every time I did, part of me hoped someone would tell me it was a terrible idea. No one did. I delayed for days, told myself I'd only look into it, nothing more, that I could still walk away. The pride part of me hated how desperate it felt. The denial part kept whispering that it was just a game, something I could control and quit whenever I wanted. But the other feeling, the one that said I could finally be the girl people talked about, the one who had power instead of just floating along, kept winning. One night I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hand for almost an hour, heart going too fast. I almost put it down. Then I typed the message and hit send before I could talk myself out of it again. Yes, I'll do it. I got the address the next afternoon in a short text, just a hotel name near the river and a room number. No name, no photo. I told myself I'd only go look, that I could still walk away. I took the train in from the suburbs, then walked the last few blocks so I wouldn't arrive too early. The building was one of those mid-range places that looked nicer from the outside than it felt once you were inside. Glass doors, a quiet lobby with beige carpet, and a desk clerk who barely looked up. I went straight to the elevator. The hallway on the 12th floor smelled like cleaning products and old air conditioning. I stood outside the door for almost a full minute before I knocked. A man opened it, mid-40s maybe, button-down shirt, sleeves rolled once. He smiled like he'd been expecting someone else and then corrected himself. He said my name the way it had been given to him, short, no last name, and stepped aside. The room was standard. King bed, desk by the window, minibar still sealed. He offered me water. I said yes, just to have something to hold. We sat on the edge of the bed for a while and talked about nothing. Weather, traffic, how long I'd lived in Melbourne. The silences kept stretching. He asked if this was my first time. I said it was. He nodded like that was fine and explained the basics. Time, what was expected, what wasn't. Cash on the table when we were done, no phones, no real names. I noticed the wedding ring he kept twisting without seeming to realize it. His hands were steady, but his voice had a small shake when he asked if I was comfortable. I said I was. It wasn't true, but it was the only answer that moved things forward. The room felt too bright. The curtains were only half closed, and the late afternoon light made everything look ordinary and wrong at the same time. What happened next is something I still don't put into words. I remember the sound of the air conditioner kicking on. I remember staring at a water stain on the ceiling for a long stretch of minutes. I remember him saying thank you in a quiet voice when it was over, like we had just finished a business meeting. He counted out the money and put it on the desk. More than I'd ever held for a few hours of anything. I folded it without counting it back and put it in my bag. He walked me to the door, said I could text the same number if I wanted to do this again. I nodded and left. In the elevator, I watched the floor numbers drop and tried to feel something clear, guilt or power or regret, but it was just this hollow quiet. Outside, I walked to the train station instead of calling a ride. The whole way home, I kept touching the edge of the cash in my bag like it might disappear. By the time I reached my street, the sun was almost gone. I sat on the front steps for a while before going inside. Something in me had shifted, and I already knew it wasn't going to shift back. The money showed up fast. First, it was just enough to cover the train fares and the pills I'd been stretching. Then it was rent for a better place closer to the city, the kind with a doorman who nodded when I walked in. I paid off a couple of small debts I hadn't told anyone about and still had cash left over. I bought a coat that cost more than my old monthly budget. I wore it once and felt like a different person standing in front of the mirror. Clients started taking me to restaurants where the menus didn't have prices. One guy flew me to Sydney for a weekend and put me up in a suite that looked out over the Harper. Another sent a driver to pick me up in a black car that smelled like leather and new money. I started recognizing the same faces at certain hotel bars, men who spoke quietly about deals and shares, and people whose names I only ever heard in headlines. They'd leave envelopes on the table or transfer money before I even left the room. Sometimes the requests had nothing to do with the usual arrangement. One client just wanted me to sit across from him at dinner and pretend to be his niece while he talked business with two older men. Another asked me to accompany him to a private gallery opening and not speak unless spoken to. I did both. It felt strange and powerful at the same time. I bought better clothes, heels I could barely walk in at first, a bag that made people look twice when I set it down. I moved into an apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the city lights. The first night I slept there, I stood at the glass for a long time thinking, I can't believe this is my life now. The group from before started treating me differently. Some of them asked for advice. Some of them looked at me like I'd crossed a line they weren't ready for. I stopped answering most of their messages. There were nights that felt electric, walking into a hotel lobby in a dress someone else had paid for, knowing the room key was already waiting. There were other nights that sat wrong in my stomach, overhearing a client talk about his wife and kids like they were items on a list. Watching one man hand over a black card without looking at the total. Sitting in a quiet lounge while two businessmen discussed a deal that sounded like it could ruin someone, and neither of them lowered their voices because I was just the girl at the table. The rules of this world were simple and unspoken. Smile, stay flexible, never ask too many questions, and never stay longer than you were paid for. Every week I crossed another small line without marking it. I stopped checking my bank balance the way I used to. I stopped telling myself I'd only do this until the end of the semester. I started measuring time in bookings instead of lectures. The ordinary life I'd been so afraid of fading into started to feel distant, almost imaginary. One morning, I realized I hadn't been home for dinner with my parents in over a month. I told myself they wouldn't understand the new version of me anyway. By then, the two lives had already started to blur. The money, the rooms, the quiet power of being wanted on demand, it all felt normal. Leaving would have meant going back to the version of myself who worried about train fares and average grades. That version already felt like someone I used to know. The first year still had edges I could feel. By the second year, those edges started rounding off. Clients got more specific about what they wanted before I even arrived. Some sent detailed messages about the clothes I should wear or the stories I should tell if anyone asked. I learned to scan a room in under 10 seconds. Who was watching, who was nervous, who had already decided I was just part of the night. I got good at smiling through conversations that meant nothing to me. I'd nod at the right times and laugh when it was expected. It stopped feeling like acting after a while. I used different names depending on the booking. Sometimes I was Emma, sometimes Claire. I kept a short list of fake details ready: where I went to school, what my parents did, why I was in the city. I deleted every message thread before I went to sleep. I carried cash in different places in my bag so I never had to dig for it in front of anyone. At hotels, I started checking where the stairwell was without thinking about it. One night, a booking got canceled an hour before, and the first thing I felt was relief. That surprised me more than it should have. I missed my mom's birthday 2 years in a row. The second time, I sent flowers and a short text. She replied that she understood I was busy with work. I didn't correct her. Old friends stopped inviting me to things. When they did, I usually said I had a shift or a family thing. The excuses came out smooth. I barely noticed I was making them. One girl from uni tried to stay in touch for a while. We met for coffee once, and she asked what I was really doing. I told her consulting. She looked at me for a long second and didn't ask again. Some clients were decent. One older guy always asked if I'd eaten and left extra cash for a taxi, even when he didn't need to. Others were harder to read. A few wanted me to listen while they talked about their marriages, like I was a therapist who also happened to be paid by the hour. One man spent an entire evening describing a business partner he was planning to force out, and then asked me what I thought, like my opinion actually mattered. I gave him the answer that kept the night moving. Another client booked me 3 times in 2 weeks and then disappeared. When he came back months later, he acted like no time had passed. I matched his energy and didn't ask questions. The parties with the old group got darker around the edges. People were using more and sleeping less. I was still showing up sometimes because it was the only place left where people still treated me like I was someone. 2 of my closest friends from that circle overdosed within 3 years of each other. The second one happened in a bathroom at a house party while I was in the next room. Someone screamed and I ran in. There was nothing anyone could do. After that, the group started falling apart. People scattered or got quiet or just stopped answering. I kept working. It was the one thing that still felt steady. I stopped noticing the expensive rooms the way I used to. A suite was just a suite. A nice dinner was just another meal I didn't have to pay for. I forgot what day of the week it was more often than I admitted. Some mornings I'd wake up in a hotel and need a few seconds to remember which city I was in. The version of me who used to care about grades and train schedules felt like a story I'd heard once and half forgotten. One night, I was sitting in the back of a car after a late booking, watching the city lights move past the window, and I realized I wasn't waiting for anything to change anymore. This was just the life I had. I didn't feel shocked by that thought. I just accepted it the way you accept the weather. After the second friend died, the group just stopped existing. People either got locked up, moved away, or stopped answering their phones. I was left with the debts from the substances and a reputation that didn't mean anything anymore. The same people who used to call me a legend now looked past me like I was already gone. I came home late again that night. The porch light was on like always. I expected the usual quiet exchange, Mom handing me water, Dad saying nothing. Instead, both of them were sitting at the kitchen table when I walked in. The house felt too still. No TV, no radio, just the clock ticking. Mom didn't raise her voice. She just looked at me and said, "We're not going to keep saving you. Either you go to a clinic tonight or we change the locks." Dad didn't speak. He reached into a drawer and set a small stack of old photographs on the table between us. Pictures of me at 10, 12, 14, smiling with clear eyes, holding the guitar, standing in the backyard with friends who were still alive. He lined them up carefully, like evidence. I stood there for a long time. The fluorescent light over the sink made everything look sharp and wrong. I could hear the fridge humming. Outside, a car went past, and the sound felt far away. I wanted them to yell. Yelling would have been familiar. This quiet version of them was worse. I didn't argue. I sat down on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and stayed there. Hours passed. The sky outside the window went from black to gray. My hands were shaking, but not from needing anything. For the first time in years, I was scared of something else. Scared that the two people who had always left the door open were ready to lock it. When morning came, Mum was still sitting in the same chair. She hadn't moved. Dad had gone to work without a word. She stood up, took her car keys off the hook, and said, "If you're coming, we leave now." I got into the passenger seat. The city was already awake, people walking dogs, buses running, shops opening. None of it seemed connected to the night that had just ended. We drove in silence. She didn't ask if I was sure. I didn't tell her I was. I just watched the streets go by and understood that the life I'd been living had no place left to stand. Getting into that car didn't fix anything overnight. Rehab was cold fluorescent lights, group sessions where people talked in circles, and nights where I stared at the ceiling wishing I could just leave and go back to the version of life that at least felt familiar. I almost walked out twice in the first month. The second time, a counselor sat with me in the hallway until the urge passed. I stayed because the alternative was the locks changing and never being able to go home again. When I got out, I moved into a small place on the other side of the city. New phone number, no social media. I deleted every contact that had anything to do with the old world. A couple of people still found ways to reach me. Short messages about money I supposedly owed, or offers to help me get back on my feet. I blocked them and kept moving. The first regular job I got was stacking shelves at a supermarket. My hands shook for weeks. I'd catch myself checking exits out of habit. Nightmares came most nights. Hotel rooms, bathroom floors, my mother's voice saying they were done saving me. Therapy helped some. Support groups helped more on the days I could actually show up. The loneliness was the part no one prepared me for. Old friends were gone. New ones didn't know what to do with the gaps in my stories. Learning how to trust people again took longer than the substances left my system. Some days I still catch myself lying about where I've been without meaning to. Shame doesn't leave just because you decide to be done with it. It sits in the background and waits for quiet moments. I've been clean 3 years now. I work as an assistant in a recording studio. It's ordinary work, setting up mics, logging sessions, making coffee. I live alone, but I drive to my parents' place every Sunday for lunch. Mom still sets an extra plate like she used to. Dad doesn't say much, but he leaves the guitar out in the living room sometimes, like an invitation I'm not ready to take yet. I still can't forgive myself for the look on my mother's face that night in the kitchen, and I still carry the fact that 2 people I cared about died while I was busy pretending I was in control. Some wounds close, some just get quieter. If you're listening to this and you think you're the only one who ever wanted to be special badly enough to almost disappear, you're not. I wanted to be the girl people talked about. Instead, I became one more person they almost lost. And I'm still here, learning how to live with that.